it's not just about your group or the other advocacy groups. There are a whole variety of different stakeholders associated with every issue. And you need to know their perspectives and understand that, build the relationships with them, and engage them. And you may not always agree, but at least you need to be communicating. So we've got two panels here, and they're both going to be jam-packed with people. So we're going to hear a lot of perspectives. One is on industry stakeholders, and the other is patient organizations. So on your agenda here, we have pharma listed first. They could not make it today. They are an important stakeholder. They weren't excluded. They were invited. So we have Amgen, Bio, Vertex, National Venture Capital Association, and the California Healthcare Institute, a whole variety of industry stakeholders. And I'm going to guess, Howard, are you going first?
I was trying to think to myself, 5 minutes, I've got to boil it down. What can I talk to you guys about? What can I, how can I convince you? And the realization I came to was that the dirty little secret about all of that testimony, the 5 minutes you get, is that you're not convincing anybody of anything in 5 minutes, especially not at a testimony. That's not how this town works. It's in fact all the things that you're doing before those 5 minutes and all those things that you're doing after those 5 minutes. That's what really matters. And so, I instead of kind of belaboring you guys with all of these different issues that we sort of care about, what I want to talk to you more than kind of 340B or Medicare Part D is about why it's important to support biotech and why it's so hard, or why a company like Amgen needs lobbyists on the Hill. So one of the things that I always like to tell folks, especially my CEO and senior executives, is that I used to work on the Hill. I worked for Nancy Pelosi. I worked for Bob Matsui, David Bonnier. I spent about 12 years working in senior leadership, working with other members of Congress, committees. I feel I sort of know kind of how they think, what they care about. And the basic fact of the matter is, especially if you think about the announcement from yesterday with Congressman Dingell announcing his retirement, the most longest serving member of Congress ever, you realize that the 7 years that I left the Hill, and this is kind of a startling statistic to me, 70% of Congress has completely turned over. So all those people that I talk to, I try to educate about Amgen, because honestly, there are a lot of people that don't know a thing about Amgen, that don't know a thing about biotechnology. Many of those people are gone. And so I have to spend, like you guys, a lot of time talking to these members of Congress about what it is that we do. Why do they need to care about supporting biotechnology? And what is it that they're doing that may help us or hurt us? And so the thing that I always try to emphasize to them, and this is kind of also where you guys come in, is that we can always quibble about reimbursement policy, regulatory issues, all the things that could help or hurt us. But the thing I always try to tell them is that the thing that you should not do is you should not do something that will hurt innovation. And for all the things that we care about, for all the things that whether it's jobs or finding those therapies for those diseases that you care about, what hurts us the most is when they create an environment that harms innovation. And I always like to use this example. And this kind of speaks to biotechnology and the differences between biotech and why it's so hard to find these therapies in biotech. So some of my IT colleagues, they talk about this one product that is incredibly amazing. You guys, in fact, you guys probably all know about it. And they tell me about how much time and resources they spent inventing this product. So they spent double the time that any other company had done previously to invent this product. And they spent double the amount of money than anybody else in the industry to create this product. And that was about 18 months and $300 million to develop this product. That product, when it first came out, it was the Apple iPhone. Probably almost every one of you have got that in your purse or wallet or pocket somewhere. And that revolutionized that industry. That completely changed the face of the smartphone, completely changed the face of the IT and telecommunications industry. But for biotech, it takes us, let me think about our last product. Our last product took us, I think, from start to finish, 17 years from the first discovery of that molecule to about $1.7 billion to market that product, to finally get that product to market. That product is a Prolia, and it's used to treat osteoporosis, also Xgeva, to use to treat cancer. That is the difference between the biotech industry and some of our other colleagues. Now, those guys have an army of lobbyists as well, and they're telling them why it's so important to support an innovative environment for their iPhone. We need to convince them that it's important to support an innovative environment for us as well. And there's going to be other folks on this panel that can speak to that, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them. But that's why we need you, because when I walk into a room and I say, hey, you got to support Amgen because, hey, we're going to invent the next therapy for whatever disease that is. And they say, well, that sounds great, and so is every other company in the world, but I don't care. You guys aren't in my district. But you know who is in that district? Patients. The patients that you guys represent, those people are in that district. And so the last story I want to tell is that I went to meet with a senior representative, and I told him, hey, we're Amgen. You guys got to support us. And I'm going to finish with this story. I've run out of time. See, that's how fast 5 minutes goes. And I said, you guys don't know us. We're not in your district, but here's why you should care. And he said, stop. I already know all about Amgen. My daughter suffers from rheumatoid arthritis. And when when she was first diagnosed, my wife and I, we had to lift her out of the bathtub every time she wanted to take a shower. And then we got her in a clinical trial program that you guys are running. And today she graduated with a varsity letter in lacrosse from Notre Dame. I said, that's amazing. And he said, so you don't have to tell me about your company and what you guys do, because I already appreciate it. That person was Senator Donnelly. And so it's those people who have a connection to patients and to that disease that makes our jobs a little bit easier, convince them why innovation is so important. And that's why it's so important for us to be supporting you guys and for you guys to be telling your story to the members of Congress and senators on the Hill. So thank you for the time, but I'm sorry I went over.
Next up is Jeannie Haggerty, Director of Government Relations at Bio.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here today. I will go ahead and belabor some of the policy points that we're working on, but that's one of the jobs of a trade association, and Bio represents about 1,000 member companies and state associations and universities across the country and in about 30 other countries. So we're kept very busy. And one thing that I think is unique to our trade association is that we represent companies along the spectrum. We have very small emerging biotech companies that have a patent and a dream, but won't see a product on the market for 10 years if they're lucky, 17 in some cases, and all the way along to companies like Amgen and Vertex that are successful and have products on the market. So what we try and do, and what I try and do when I go to the Hill, is lobby as a unified voice of the biotech industry, and talk about the issues that are important and things that do continue to promote innovation in our industry, because it is so important. And we, we're working to bring drugs to the market for the patients, and so that we can try and conquer some of these diseases that are horrible and life-threatening, and we want to get rid of. So some of our priority issues include, ensuring that there's a functional FDA so that products can actually be approved, ensuring that there's adequate reimbursement so that drugs can be paid for, protecting intellectual property, and making pro-innovation tax policies. So one of the most important things, and I know that this is important to all of you and everyone in this room, is ensuring that FDA has the tools that it needs to bring products to patients. Back in 2012, we did the 5th reauthorization of the prescription drug user fee program, which allows our companies to pay money to the FDA, to pay fees to the FDA to help with the drug review process, and allows the FDA to hire reviewers to look at, to be able to review the drugs. And so that was included in FDASIA, which is sort of the larger. Thank you. I was wondering if there was a button. But within FDASIA, we also had some really new innovative things happening that I think particularly in the rare and orphan drug development space will be groundbreaking. And we're continuing to work on those things like accelerated approval, which will allow more modern tools to be used, so that particularly in the case of a lot of orphan drug development, the traditional clinical trial design process doesn't work effectively. If you have 100 patients in the United States, it's hard to come up with 1,000 to design a clinical trial. And so having something like Accelerated will allow for more targeted subpopulations to get products to the market that may not otherwise get there. We're continuing to monitor this. We're a little bit worried, and I know a lot of you in this room have been engaged in this as well, that the draft guidance that came out doesn't completely focus on rare diseases the way it should. So we're continuing to work to make sure that hopefully the final guidance has more of the focus that's necessary on rare diseases. Breakthrough therapy is another designation that we think will be groundbreaking. And pardon me, I'm a little bit jet lagged, so I did bring notes. Basically, breakthroughs will allow for enhanced communication and more communication with the FDA earlier in the process so that we can get products that are really new and innovative to market. So we're working on that. We're actually tracking the success of the program. There's been a ton of interest so far, so we're going to continue working on that. Adequate reimbursement is also a huge priority, but frankly, that's kind of boring, and so I won't get into that. Finally, the orphan drug tax credit, which I know is a huge priority to everyone in this room. We are continue working to protect that and make sure that it doesn't get inadvertently swept up in tax reform. And I'll take my last few seconds to just say that Bio is always looking for more ways to be a resource to the patient advocate community and to work with you. We have annual patient health and advocacy. We have an annual patient health and advocacy summit that's a 2-day event, policy-driven panel discussions, networking, great opportunities. At our convention, we engage the patient groups. They speak on panels. They put together events, and we tend to do monthly patient advocate briefings on issues such as different reimbursement issues, 340B, intellectual property, things like that. And I just want to take a quick moment to point out our bio rock stars who deal with the patient community, Lauren Neff and Jillian Mullins. So we'd love to have you guys get more engaged with them. And with that, I will end, because whenever anyone testifies before Congress, typically they always go over by a few minutes. Now I'll stop.
Okay, next up is Daniel Henry, Senior Director for Policy at Vertex.
Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thanks to RDLA for hosting the event. I'd like to start off by just saying I think one of the very basic ways we can all work together start at meetings like this. I think it's a great opportunity for all of us to talk about the issues that are important not only to biotech, but also areas where our issues align, quite frankly, and talk more specifically about how we can work together. So for those of you who are not familiar with Vertex, we represent sort of the smaller and mid-size company. We're not quite as well resourced as, say, Amgen is, but certainly have worked with Amgen and the patient organizations on a range of issues. If you're not familiar with Vertex, we received approval for Kalydeco, which is a therapy that treats cystic fibrosis patients. And it's it's used for a very small subset of those patients, about 1,200. We were very happy to receive news from the FDA that is an expanded indication now and will increase access to hopefully another 125 patients with cystic fibrosis. So you can imagine, just based on that information alone, that we clearly care about all of the issues that are important to rare disease patients more broadly, but obviously we're very focused on cystic fibrosis. I will say, having been in and around DC for a long while, I'd probably echo some of the themes that have been raised before, which is when you think about how, as a patient, you can be effective and really raise some of these issues higher on the radar. The panel before talked a lot about the noise that not only the legislators are having to deal with, but also the regulators. And so I think hearing not only from the industry, but also from you, the patient, and quite frankly, your voice in many instances can be more powerful than ours, is going to be incredibly important. So hearing the issues, talking about them, being armed with good messages and data to support your points, I think is going to be incredibly important. So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about really a handful of issues that are top of mind for us in terms of access and how patients are accessing the system and some of the new marketplaces that were created. I know you spent some time this morning talking about the Affordable Care Act and some of the pieces that are in play. And again, kind of picking up on a theme that was raised in the session before, the legislation is really just the first piece, and obviously a very, very critical piece. But we're in a phase now, even several years later, where we're dealing with very important implementation issues. So some of the things that we're focused on relates to how patients with cystic fibrosis may or may not have access to the necessary providers. What do the provider networks look like in some of these new marketplaces? Really, I'm talking about the health insurance exchanges. And we're in the process of finalizing an analysis where we looked at that and looked at 5 metropolitan statistical areas and found that, in fact, in some instances, there are shortages of providers included in this network. Some of the centers that are so important for cystic fibrosis patients are not included in some of the networks. So we are working through a couple of different channels. One, we're working very directly with legislators to educate on this issue. I think the point that they're not always aware of the issues, and it's our job collectively in this room to make sure that they're aware of this issue. We're also working to submit comments, and this is the part that is quite frankly less glamorous, but to submit comments to the agency to make sure they're aware of what we believe are sufficient standards for provider adequacy issues. Another issue I would raise for you is what formularies look like in the health insurance exchanges. Again, I know there was some discussion earlier today about how, as a patient, you get meaningful information about what a formulary looks like. Some of the policy trends that we're looking at is most of the health insurance plans that are participating in exchanges have very aggressive tiering, which results in aggressive cost sharing for patients. And so that's another area where we're working very directly to educate legislators, educate regulatory bodies, and again, make sure that there's sufficient standards and oversight of all of these areas. So I can see my time is up as well, but again, thanks to RDLA for hosting this, and I would look forward to any conversations around this in terms of how we can best work together. That's just a small sampling of what we're focused on, but thanks again.
Thanks, Daniel. Boy, these hearings are going really, really well. Kelly Sloan is VP of Life Science Policy at National Venture Capital Association.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me, RDLA. It's so important because the venture capital industry is a very small niche industry, and I'm the one and only person at MVCA that focuses on life science policy issues. So it's really important for me to try to get my message out so you guys can carry this message, because looking at the innovation ecosystem, it starts really through funding, and venture capital dollars are primarily one of the few sources in the really early stage of development that invests in new treatments and medical technologies and healthcare services. So we all play a very important role in this innovation ecosystem. And today I have a positive and, well, kind of a real kind of scary story, but then a real positive ending to the story that is starting to upward trend. And this is what the main point is. If you look at this, the last since 2007, you see first-time fundings in life science investment. That's the money that's fueling the Amgens of the future. That investment trend has significantly declined. And the main reason that has been is because of the regulatory process, mainly the FDA, because of the time and cost of development. And as you know, it costs billions of dollars and 15 years to get a biotech drug on the market, and that has just become an unsustainable business model. And I think it's important to know that business matters when it comes to that, and that you see money is drying up to really fuel new innovation. backwards, I'm sorry. And here you can see, over the years, again, the drop of how many companies have been funding over the course of that period of time. And it's really important for policymakers and patient groups to understand that, the very beginning of this innovation ecosystem, there's been a real bottleneck. I think we've been all working very hard over the last 5 years on the FDA regulatory approval and helping congressmen and senators and FDA understand that what's going on in there. And from our perspective, I think the passage of the FDUFA and MDUFA bills have been very helpful, and you're starting to see that ship turn around, and we think that FDA is really starting to understand, that they've got to do a better job, and we're starting to see that. But there's much more work to be done. I keep doing. This is the positive story, is last year in the IPO market in the biotechnology, they had half of the IPOs last year were in the biotech space. The very first time since, again, 2007. In 2009, you'll see there was maybe 1 or 2 IPOs. So this is a really good sign that you're starting to see things turn, particularly in the biotech space. So looking at our priorities and what NVCA is focused on and what we would love to work with patient groups on and the other parts of the innovation ecosystem is really moving forward on the FDA reforms that we've started, but also we've been really focused also in really trying to work with FDA in formulating a patient-centered regulatory framework. We think if you get the patient's voice in the very early stages of what patients want, based on the science, then that just helps the whole regulatory process move forward, and we'd love to work with everybody on that. And really defining a regulatory pathway for special medical youth pathways. I know FDA is looking into that area, and I know members of Congress are. We think that is another area. So if you could design clinical trials for a smaller group of patients, especially in areas of unmet medical need, that would be a huge way to get innovation fueled and grow. And then really looking at the FDA's special protocol assessment process. We see some breakdowns in that area, and we know that Congress is starting to focus on that, and that's something that we're focused on. But I would say that the other huge, big issue moving forward, and we're all talking about this, is innovation in this new healthcare system we have, and who is going to pay for these important medical innovations. Who should be defining value? Should these new payment models be defining values? Should the patients the ones be defining what value of innovation is? And that is a huge issue that we all need to get together and work together so we can continue to fuel medical innovation in this country. Because as we know, often it starts out very expensive, and as it gets adopted into the market, then the costs go down. But if you can't support it in the very beginning, that whole innovation piece is going to go away. And I really look forward to working with all of you on those few issues. And again, thank you so much for including us in this process.
All right, Todd Gillenwater, Interim President and CEO of California Healthcare Institute.
And I believe, there we go. Thank you for having me here today again. Todd Gillenwater with the California Healthcare Institute. Julia and RDLA, thank you for having me, and thank all of you for being here today. What you're going to be doing over the next couple of days is really critical to advancing policymakers' appreciation, recognition, and understanding of the need to fund science research, and that we have policies in place across a lot of what we talked about today. Regulatory at the FDA, coverage and payment, IP, tax policy, so that the therapies that you want, you need, your family, your children need, come out the other end of the pipeline. CHI represents the entire kind of broad continuum of life sciences R&D in California. Our membership includes many of the folks up here on the dais with me today, but as well as, in addition to industry and the venture capital investment community, our membership also includes the research community. So the University of California, Stanford, Cedars-Sinai, City of Hope, really, again, the entire ecosystem, the term that we've heard, I think, a couple of times today, that is really driving biomedical research, biomedical innovation today. So what is that ecosystem? We talk about this ecosystem a lot. It's a term we use a lot at CHI. And about a year ago, we actually were asked by a member of Congress, you talk about this ecosystem, and we know you come in and talk to us about the FDA, and you come in and talk to us about the NIH, you come in and talk to us about Medicare. How does this all connect together? Is it really an ecosystem? So we actually put together a little bit of a Farmville type comic of what that ecosystem looks like and what CHI represents. And frankly, we think this ecosystem is certainly exists in California, but exists in every state around this country who wants to have this biomedical innovation ecosystem in their backyard. And it is representative of what we have and what we lead at in this country. So you have kind of in the middle there your general kind of pipeline for how innovation progresses from the basic research through applied research and development, through regulatory approval, all the way to patients. You have down here at the bottom kind of the makeup of that ecosystem. In the upper right and left-hand corners, you have policymakers in Washington, D.C., and in our case, back in Sacramento, California, at the state level, who are working on legislation, policy, and other issues that affect that ecosystem. And of course, in the middle, what this ecosystem is truly all about is that sun. It's new treatments and technologies to improve patient care. One of the questions we get when we show this image is that sun rising or is that sun setting? It's pretty easy, as I'm sure you can all appreciate and understand, to get pretty down and say the FDA isn't moving as quickly as it should. We're not funding research to the extent that we should. Coverage and payment policies are getting more difficult. We're eternal optimists, certainly in California. I think all of us in this dais are eternal optimists, and I'm betting that all of you are eternal optimists as well. We believe that sun is rising if we have the right types of policies in place. And really the only way we'll have the right types of policies in place is if we at this dais are doing our job, but most importantly, if you are all part of the conversation and part of the discussion. I too worked on the Hill for a member of Congress. I had people like me now coming to talk to me and tell me, look, we need more consistent FDA policies. We need more science funding. We need better payment for medicines and technologies. I respectfully listened. It was important information, but no message and no messenger was more impactful than you and who you represent. And if I were to give one piece of kind of guidance, it's the more that you can contextualize to policymakers who are tackling not only these types of policies, but policies in financial services and policies in international relations, why there are policies in NIH and FDA and coverage and payment, how it affects this entire ecosystem, and how important it is that we have a vibrant, well-understood ecosystem so we make sure that that sun indeed does continue to rise. And I'll stop there. Thank you.